Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Taming the Quality Management Chaos. My name is Sana Lynn Wrigley, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Integral Healthcare Solutions. Let's kick things off with a round of introductions. Joining us today, we have our CEO, Thomas Goddard.
Hi, thanks, Sana, and thanks, everybody, for joining us in this webinar. I'm Tom Goddard. I am the founder and CEO of Integral Healthcare Solutions. Been doing this for about 16 and a half years, and before that I was Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel for URAC, which is where I met these two others on the panel you'll meet in a moment. And before that, Vice President General Counsel of a large health plan on the East Coast, and worked at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners for a while. And by training, I'm a lawyer and a psychologist. And so I'll turn it over to our president, Lesley Malus Reed.
Hi, I'm Lesley Malus Reed. I started in the Canadian healthcare system and started working at URAC as a reviewer in 1997. I joined Tom on the other side of things in 2003, and this is what we've been doing ever since. I'm very excited to talk about today's topic. Sue?
Hi, I'm Sue DeMarino. I've been with IHS almost 3 years in November. Before that, I worked at URAC for 17 years in various roles. I am a nurse by background. Prior to being at URAC, I was the director of a UMCM program at a large tertiary care hospital in Pittsburgh. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk about quality.
Thank you, Sue. For all of you joining us, thanks so much for being here today. We're very happy to have you with us and to talk about this really important part of accreditation. As we go along, I'll be adding some notes over in the sidebar. You're also welcome to post comments and questions there. If you have questions about the topic you'd like answered, you can look to the left and below. You'll see Ask a Question listed right there. If you click on that, you'll be able to put your question in or vote for questions that are already in there. We've pre-populated some that we received in advance. There's also a couple of polls over there that you are more than welcome to vote on. We always like to hear from you. So without further ado, let's start off with an overview of what is quality management and just why is it so important. Tom.
Quality management is really a distinctive characteristic of URAC accreditation. More than any of the other accreditation organizations with whom we've worked, including NCQA and ACHC and Joint Commission, URAC really places a lot of emphasis on the functioning of your quality management program and at the heart of that, your quality management committee. It serves as an intersection between the clinical and the administrative parts of your organization, and all sorts of things run through quality management, and URAC, all roads lead through quality management. So particularly the quality management committee. I'll toss it a little more detail. As you might imagine, our chief clinician Sue is the lead on these standards when we work with our clients on the quality management standards. So I'll toss it over to Sue to get us a little deeper into the topic.
All right, great. Well, the quality standards vary a little by program at URAC. The health plan standards have the basis of what's in the other core, but they're a little more robust. They include some additional requirements. So you'll see that when you submit your documentation into Accredinet, you don't have to enter the quality standards under core, you have to enter them under the health plan standards. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those. If there's a nuance that's only applicable to health plan, we'll talk about that specifically and let you know that. I like to review quality from a trilogy of documents. So what do I mean by that? Most organizations will have a quality program description. They'll have a dashboard or a metrics tracking system, keep track of all their metrics. And then there's also the annual evaluations. Those are very important components of a quality program. What IHS has done is we've created a dashboard based on your program that identifies not only what's required in the core standards, which for most of you includes access, whether it be average speed to answer, abandonment rate, blockage rate, your complaint, and typically it's consumer complaints. When you look at the core standard, but a newer interpretation had the URAC reviewers also including things like client complaints. And then the other piece is your satisfaction, both consumer satisfaction and client satisfaction. Now that's common to all the products, whether you be pharma, health plan, or just any of the other programs. When you get into some of the pharma programs, you'll see that you really do need a dashboard to keep track of all of the requirements. So if, for instance, if you were going for mail service, you would have CSCD requirements that are specific to quality. You would have farm ops standards that are specific to quality, as well as drum requirements. In specialty, you have the added requirement of patient management. In PBM, you have to talk about network adequacy. In health plan, you have to talk about network adequacy. There's a multitude of information that has to be looked at from a quality perspective. One of the things I like about a dashboard, though, is you can incorporate other functions, not just accreditation functions, that you're required to report out on. So for instance, if you have contracted requirements from your clients that say you have to report on something, you can track it in your dashboard, especially if there's a financial offset if you don't meet that deliverable. As if I were a leader in your organization and I knew I was going to have to pay money back if I didn't meet a certain access to service, you better bet I'm going to monitor that to make sure that we're meeting that, so I'm not having to give money back. Some of the regulatory requirements might include pieces like reporting requirements on a periodic basis. So that's why I think it's really important to have a dashboard. Let me speak a minute about the annual evaluation. In all of the cores, they all require an evaluation of your quality program. And I will tell you, we've recently thought about developing a template for an evaluation. And some of the things that we were looking at were, what was our initial baseline? How did we do this year? What were the barriers to meeting your goals for this year? What are you going to do in the next year to help mitigate that problem of not meeting your goal? So those are all things that are incorporated into your annual evaluation. If you had attended the Core 4 version of Core that had come out but is now only applicable to CM and the Certificate of Maintenance program, while URAC continues to beta test, you'll see other factors that they want incorporated into quality. Do you have the right people involved? Do you have the right resources available? So those are some things that you need to think about, because that probably will be coming down the pike as URAC continues to beta test and get feedback on those quality standards. Lesley, Tom, do you want to add anything?
I do. So one of the things people forget is that in addition to the annual evaluation, there's also an annual review of your program description, and they are not the same. So some folks feel if they're going to do the review annually of the program description, they'll send that up to the committee that reviews it, the higher up committee, whether it's a board or an executive committee or even an individual who owns a company. But that is not the evaluation. You need to send both up to those groups for review and approval. So just bear that in mind. And I also just wanted to comment on the dashboard. What I love about the dashboard is that different things have to be reported at different times. And so the dashboard really helps me keep track of, is it quarterly? Is it annually? I just find it helps me if I'm going to have a client who has 2 different accreditations. There's a lot of things to track, and the dashboard just helps me with that over feeling of, oh my goodness, how do I track everything I need to report? Tom?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add at this point is there's so much to talk about with quality in URAC, but I think I'd add, particularly for those of you on this webinar that are new to the URAC process, the URAC focus is on metrics, is on quantifiable, measurable things. So it is a more specific notion about quality management or quality improvement than some organizations operate under. So, for example, and you see this reflected all throughout the quality standards, you'll see track and analyze or track and trend as expressions throughout. And here's an example of what would not be, what one organization might consider a quality initiative, but which URAC would not. And that would be, let's say you need a new system. Let's say you don't have a system to do a particular important project. Let's say you're a startup specialty pharmacy and you don't have a well-functioning patient management system. Your current status is no patient management system. Would buying a patient management system and installing it and getting it up and running be a quality improvement project for URAC purposes? And the answer is no, because it's not quantifiable. If the first number is 0, we don't have a patient management system, and then the second number is 1, now we do, that doesn't count. Once you have that system in place, then that will help you generate perhaps some efficiencies that you can measure or patient outcomes that you can measure, but simply installing a system that you need to install to operate appropriately doesn't count because it's not quantifiable. And you'll see this emphasis on tracking and trending quantifiable measures throughout. And the only other thing I'd say about that is make sure that, particularly on your quality improvement projects, you're using the same units of measure in the baseline, and we'll talk more about QIPs in a little bit, but in the baseline measurement, in your remeasurements, in the setting of goals, make sure that in the spirit of this quantifiable focus, you are using the same metrics all across a particular concept.
And I'll just add one other thing. In the general overview, opening comments, and that's about reports. So as Lesley indicated, there's a requirement to report to senior leadership, but don't forget to think about reports to your quality committee. So you need to talk about how that's happening. Well, in most instances, it's your reports, it's your graphs, it's all of those presentations that you do to your quality committee is the mechanism you use. For staff, I've seen some really innovative things to keep staff updated on what quality activities are in place. I've seen an organization recently develop a blog that's what they do. They talk about their quality initiatives on their blog. Some organizations use newsletters. Some organizations say, hey, we're going to put the meeting minutes on SharePoint. Here's access to it. Read it. Understand what's going. And I will bet you that in every URAC interview that I personally participated as a reviewer, and every organization that I've helped since I've been a consultant, one of the questions that was asked of staff is, do you know what quality things are going on in your organization? And when the reviewers get the deer in the headlight look, then they're going to start digging a little deeper. Why do the employees who are doing the work on a daily basis not understand what quality initiatives you're putting in place? So think about that.
I've seen on TV screens, the screens that are throughout, where they'll have the quality initiatives and the QIPs, which is really
cool. And in our organization, we talk about our quality initiatives at our all-staff meeting. So there's really no excuse. Everybody in the staff, who of course goes to an all-staff meeting, will get a briefing every single time on the latest news on our quality improvement projects and other activities.
Right.
The key, though, when you're using, I'm sorry, Sana, the key when you're using staff meeting minutes, though, is to make sure you're documenting that you're covering quality. Sana?
Right.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, we even make sure in our meetings when we're going over it to say, This is what URAC is talking about when they ask about quality initiatives. What we just told you, make sure you remember it. So totally valid to call it out and really emphasize it in that way to make sure your staff understands.
The other piece of reporting might be to regulatory bodies. So, you know, to your clients, do you have to report certain things to your clients? Those are all examples of reporting both internally and externally. The meetings themselves, the URAC standards that you have to meet at least quarterly. One of the pitfalls that we see occasionally is when organizations say that they're going to do it monthly, and then it's the summer holiday and no one's there, so they cancel it. It's the holiday season, they cancel it because everybody's on vacation. Now you're not in compliance with your own policies and procedures. I would strongly encourage you to state that you're going to meet at a minimum quarterly, and then ensure that you meet once a quarter. And then if you have meetings more frequently, you're still in compliance with your standards. The other tip that we would give you is to have a standing agenda item. And as part of that standing agenda item, put your standing committee members, list them on a roster, include their names and their titles and what department they're representing. Then it's there for you. You don't have to worry about adding it to every meeting minute. It's done. So that's another area where sometimes we see folks struggling.
Yeah, it's very, very common for us when we're reviewing documents for our clients, for us to receive meeting minutes for committee meetings, for the quality committee and other committees like the executive team or board, for that little piece of advice that Sue just gave about job titles and departments they represent to not be put in there. And that's essential. You'll always get that document back from URAC if you submit it. So make sure it's, John Smith, Director of Finance, Sandra Jones, Director of Quality. Make sure it's all in there. It's important so that they, and that this is also particularly important, particularly for health plans or networks that have outside, or PBMs that have outside people by virtue of the requirement of the standard on the committee. Make sure you identify these folks are outside of the organization as members of this committee, and these folks are employees of the organization, so that URAC can check those boxes that say you've got outside people represented, or if you're using the quality committee to meet the requirements of Core 5, which requires that you have interdepartmental communications and committee meetings, then having the job titles and departments they represent will help the URAC reviewer check the box for Core 5. Lesley.
I just want to talk about the minutes for a moment. A lot of people submit beautiful PowerPoints and reports as attachments to the minutes, but if the minutes don't reflect a discussion, URAC doesn't know that it was really discussed. So please ensure that, for example, if you're going to submit your risk assessments that you do annually, that you are submitting not just the report and executive summary, but that it was submitted, there was discussion, or even that there was no discussion, that it was reviewed and approved. But the minutes must reflect that it was presented, reviewed, and approved.
And then the other thing I would add for the minutes is you may recall that you have to have approved meeting minutes. You can define how that's going to occur. My recommendation to you is to have it as part of your standing agenda to review and approve the previous minutes. Some organizations rely on signatures, and what happens is the signatures never get added. That person leaves your organization. Now it's time for accreditation. You have no formal approved meeting minutes. So please think about whether you truly want to have a signature on your meeting minutes. I personally believe that it's better to have it recorded in the minutes that the minutes were presented and either approved as provided or approved with the following changes or something along those lines.
Okay. Sorry.
We just got a question in from one of our attendees asking about if there's best practices around the frequency that the members of the Quality Management Committee, particularly those from external to the organization, should be changed out.
Hi, John. Good to see you there. This is particular to this question is particular to health plans, health networks, and pharmacy benefit management organizations, for whom the requirement of having some sort of representation of the network, some way to get input into the Quality Management Committee. It can be done two ways. You can either have it a member of the network, the provider network, on the committee, or you can have a separate committee. It's often called a physician advisory committee or something like that, that communicates about clinical issues with the Quality Management Committee. John's question is about kind of the first of those two approaches to complying with that standard. And I don't know that I have in all the years I've worked with health plans and health networks, have a best practice around this. A lot of it depends on how much access do you have, and how some of it is mundane as market share. I mean, if you have a big market share, you can pretty much docs might be lining out the door to get on the committee because it's important to their practice. But if you're a small organization in a larger market, it might be more difficult to persuade people to come through, and so your selection ratio is not as good. And I'm not sure I've seen a real advantage to rapid turnover or stable committees, as long as they're engaged, know the network. And that's really the key thing to look at from what I've seen is, are your members engaged and asking questions of the staff and providing substantive and valuable guidance to the staff?
And do they represent the field in which you're doing business? So for instance, if you're a specialty organization, you would want to have a representative who was within that in that specialty. And then, as Tom indicated, how frequently are they meeting? Are they showing up? If you have a representative who frequently doesn't show up, I think it's time to change.
Awesome, thank you.
I just wanted to comment on the minutes that we were talking about as well. And most of our attendants, as far as I understand, are not new initial applicants, they're recreds. And one of the things that you learned from the last time you went through accreditation is the more flagging you could do, either electronic or paper tabs, however you're going to present your minutes, the easier it is for URAC to review your minutes, right? And the name of the game, as I've always said to all of our clients, is to get the reviewer out the door quickly. And so one of the things to help them is to flag your complaints, flag your satisfaction, your access standards, so that they can easily find them. Please don't leave this to the last minute, because you're only going to know that you're on the right track if you're flagging them as you go. It will be a lot easier for you. You need to maintain them for the next 3 years between your accreditation programs.
And particularly for all of those of you who are already accredited and thinking about kind of gearing up for reaccreditation, 3 years worth of flagging quality meeting minutes. I wouldn't wish that on
painful.
Enemy of
painful.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we're asked about what departments should be represented on the quality committee. And one of the things I would tell you is, if you're a smaller organization and you have a compliance committee, you have a marketing committee, you have to maintain minutes for all of those meetings to be able to provide evidence to URAC that you're tracking trending, that you're reviewing and approving your marketing collateral. Organizations will sometimes bring that to the quality committee, and that will be their mechanism to do that reporting, so that they only have to have one set of minutes. Now, larger organizations may have an independent compliance committee and then have a liaison to the quality committee that's there to listen for things like breaches and things like that, or regulatory updates. But, you know, it's up to you as an organization. URAC is silent, except you should have representation on your quality committee from all of the departments that are within the scope of the accreditation. Les, Tom, Sana, anything else?
I was thinking about the history of our own company. You know, we for many years it was just me and Lesley, and so whatever committee we were having, it was just the two of us on a call like this. And then, but now there are about 10 of us, and we actually have functioning committees. We have an executive team that's 4 of us, the 4 you're looking at here, and then we have a quality committee that brings in IT and compliance and marketing, and then we have all staff meetings. Now, of course, with larger organizations, I see some of our more than just a couple of health plan clients on this call. It's going to make more sense for you if you than it will be for smaller organizations to have kind of multiple committees. You might not want to bring all your compliance issues to quality management, but as Sue says, if you make that choice, make sure there's a liaison. Make sure there's connectivity, even if your quality committee isn't functioning as all of the committees. The quality committee, with the exception of health plans credentialing committees, the quality committee is, to my knowledge, the only required. No, there's the clinical committee and the pharmacy standards. URAC doesn't have a lot of committees required. You know, quality, clinical in pharmacy, the credentialing committee, and then the leadership committee, whatever that is, the board of directors or executive team. And even that, as Lesley said, can be simply one person. But a lot of organizations do have a utilization management committee, a compliance committee, a marketing materials review committee. Those are not URAC mandated committees, which is why you can put them all in quality or have them separate or have no committees at all for those functions. This is a little editorial note. I'm always a little nervous about utilization management committees. They always, whenever I've come across them, they always kind of frighten me a little bit because they can kind of muddy up the kind of clean handling of utilization management functions. So enough about that.
Well, and it serves the purpose of Core 5 as well. So
Yeah.
Core 5 is a standard that requires you to show that there's interdepartmental participation. And very often it's the Quality Management Committee that has representations from various departments that help to meet this standard. Some folks that are larger might present their ops committee to meet that standard, but the majority of your staff who will be on the quality committee, the majority of our clients will present their quality committee to help meet that standard.
And I'd like to talk a minute about when do you provide URAC the quality meeting minutes. In the past, that was often looked at only during the validation visit, the on-site visit. When I was at URAC, it was called an on-site visit. And so that was when the URAC reviewers would expect to see them. In the pharma area specifically, they are requiring those meeting minutes be submitted with the desktop review. And if you don't provide it, you get an RFI asking for it. So I would tell you, even though the program guides do not ask for those meeting minutes until the validation visit, be prepared to provide it for the desktop review.
And Sue,
You will find it.
how many would you recommend?
I always tell folks to give 2 examples.
Now,
So
some people are going to be a little nervous about providing meeting minutes that might have organizationally sensitive information, and URAC understands your concern around that, and so you can certainly black out particularly sensitive information, and certainly never submit PHI. That's a given. URAC never ever wants to see your PHI come through the transom. So make sure
and to add to that, Tom, just 1 second, since you made that point so well, I wanted to add, and they will cite you for Core 16 if you submit PHI.
Right.
And that's mandatory standard. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, just to make sure we got your attention on that. Now, don't go to the extreme and submit minutes that are so blacked out that you can't tell anything that was going on. There's certainly not every word that was recorded in the minutes is confidential. So use your judgment around that. I do see a question over here from desk. Can you clarify interdepartmental? For specialty pharmacy, does representation of both inpatient and outpatient count, or does this need to be broader than just that? I'll take a stab at this and then toss it to Lesley and to Sue. Interdepartmental is up to you. The fundamental concept behind it is that URAC wants the clinicians to talk to the non-clinicians. They want administration to talk to the kind of the front office stuff. So, and it's going to vary widely depending on the structure of your organization, specifically about inpatient and outpatient. I've never seen URAC get that specific as to say, no, you have inpatient but not outpatient represented on this. I've never seen that level of specificity. You have a good deal of flexibility. The key thing here is administrative and clinical. Lesley, I saw you.
Yeah, so let's talk about what's in scope, right? You have to think about who's in scope of accreditation. So you want compliance, IT, possibly HR. You want to have your pharmacist in charge if you're in pharmacy, or you want a representative, credentialing if you're health plan. So you think about what departments are in scope, contracting if you're health plan, and those are the types of folks that they're hoping are going to be sitting on your quality committee.
And if you can't get a representative from that committee, but you have a subject matter expert, like for instance in pharma, sometimes we see that there is one individual in the pharmacy division that does the IT work and is the liaison for the IT. You want to make that clear on your roster that person is the liaison to the IT folks or the liaison to marketing, so that URAC can see that you understand what the requirement is and what interdepartmental is.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm looking at some of these other questions that we got ahead of time, and we might as well jump into them a bit. We've already talked about who should be on our QMC. Oh yeah, this is an interesting one. What if we don't have a way of measuring one of the required performance metrics? Does putting a measurement system in place count as a QIP? I touched on this earlier, but it's worth revisiting. Let's say that you've got a good complaint log and you've got a good client satisfaction and consumer satisfaction, but you don't have a good access measures. Could creating a good access measure approach be your QIP? The answer is no. It's your first step for a QIP because you need a baseline measure, but it by itself takes you simply from 0 to 1. I mean, we don't have a way to have a baseline measure. Now we do. That doesn't do it. So the answer to that one really would be no. But it's definitely the first part of your QIP. You've got to have a mechanism for measuring all of those three major areas, and you're going to have other areas that you might want to have as performance measures outside of those three areas that URAC wants.
And I would add, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, and I would add that the implementation of a new system is an intervention for your QIP. Think about what problem you're trying to solve with the implementation of that system, that hardware, whatever it is that you're putting in place.
Right.
Sometimes that's when folks will get the light bulb will go on and say, "Oh, I get it."
Right. Les?
I just wanted to, you touched upon the subject of complaints. And so especially for our specialty pharmacists out there, it was really hard for them the first time going through to come up with complaints. And now we're going to come up to reaccreditation, and we want to make sure that there is a robust complaint program out there. If you were to sign an attestation to say we haven't had many complaints this year, really URAC wouldn't believe you. They would say, we think you're not listening well to the types of complaints, such as someone saying, I waited too long on the phone. Well, that's a complaint. I was transferred twice. That's a complaint. So it's really about training your team to listen to the complaints. That being said, there could be a month that there are no complaints. So what do you do about presenting them to your committee if it is your policy to present them more than quarterly? You would want your minutes to reflect that the complaints report came in and there were no complaints that month. You still want to show that you presented that topic to your committee.
Yeah, URAC knows better than to think that you run so well that you have no complaints. Even small organizations get complaints. We have been grappling with this issue for years, and it's really difficult to get a whole team disciplined to first recognize what a complaint is, and then take the extra few seconds to find the complaint log and record it. What we've taken to doing, when we communicate internally, we use a system called Slack that many of you might use, and we have a channel called Complaints in there, and every Monday, I think it is, there's a little reminder that comes to all of us that says, don't remember to look for complaints and record them in the log. And once we started doing that a few months ago, we actually got our reporting up, because it's very difficult, even we live, breathe, and eat URAC. And even for an organization like us that really has no business other than accreditation compliance, it's difficult for us to keep it in our minds across the entire staff. And this is one way to do it that we've found successful for us. Just weekly reminders. Don't forget to keep an eye out for complaints and log them. Let's look at some other questions. Let's see.
Here's a good one. What do
that?
we do if our QMC missed meeting one quarter?
Well, you don't have to fall on your sword. That's the good news. But it is, if you miss a meeting in the quarter, you've actually violated two standards, because certainly your policy or quality management program description requires that your quality committee meet every quarter. So you've not only violated the URAC standard that requires quarterly meetings, but you've also at least put at risk Core 3, Core 3A or Farm Core 3B, which requires that you follow your own policies and procedures. So you're already at risk for two elements. Well, what do you do? The answer to this really is, what do you do whenever you find that you have, during the relevant period, violated a standard? The answer is a corrective action plan. The corrective action plan that identifies when you discovered the error, the non-compliance, the diagnosis of what is the nature of the non-compliance, why did you miss that, and then a corrective action plan that describes in some detail how you're going to address that, and then a monitoring mechanism to make sure that you have implemented the corrective action plan and that it remains implemented over time. The relevant periods for an initial applicant are from the moment you hit the submit button to submit your documents for desktop review into AccrediTnet at URAC. So from that point forward, that's for an initial applicant. For a reaccreditation applicant, it's from the moment of the URAC Accreditation Committee's decision to give you accreditation. So whenever you got that, that call from the reviewer, you got a full accreditation, from that point forward, you're liable. Now, does that mean if you stub your toe and miss a committee meeting or do any other sort of standard violation that you're not going to get reaccredited? Of course not, and that's where the corrective action plans come in. We have for our clients, we have a standard corrective action plan form that has all of these elements that URAC looks for. And so long as you can show a credible implementation of your corrective action plan before URAC shows up, then the odds are pretty good that URAC will say, well, there's no need to ding you on this and give you something less than a full accreditation for that violation because you discovered it, not us, and you fixed it. So there's no real point in dinging you, because the whole point in dinging you is to get your attention to fix it. And if you've already fixed it, typically URAC will not penalize you for it. But the key is you've got to find it, and you've got to fix it, and have a documented demonstration that you've implemented your corrective action. Simply showing up with a corrective action plan alone, without documentation of its implementation, won't work. And this is actually one of the most common errors in the course of a 3-year period between accreditations is to miss one of the accreditation meetings, or if there's a change in senior leadership and they weren't there for URAC accreditation last time, and they haven't been fully educated on the importance of a quarterly meeting, and it's their office that convenes those meetings, they might say, well, let's just do it twice a year, and not even know that it's a quarterly requirement in both your policies and in the URAC standards.
And one of the bits of advice I would give you when planning your meetings is to choose the middle month of the quarter. That allows you to collect your data from the previous quarter and evaluate it in that first month. You have your meeting in the second month. If you have to change it for whatever reason, then you have the third month to make it up. URAC doesn't care if you have it in January in the first quarter and May in the second quarter, as long as you have one meeting per quarter.
And this relates to our one of the other questions that we pre-populated with. Is it all right if they meet more frequently than quarterly? And Sue already addressed this, but it's worth emphasizing. Of course, I was talking with a URAC accredited company the other day, and they said, well, we meet monthly, and well, why would they do that? Well, they were finding that if they were meeting only quarterly, their meetings were 2 hours long. They had so much to cover every quarter, so they meet monthly. But as Sue said at the beginning of this webinar, the danger there is if you write that into your policy and then meet only 11 times a year instead of 12, you've violated your own policy, which is a Core 3A or Farm Core 3B violation, and that's a mandatory element. So, the monthly meetings are great. Our quality management committee is meeting with about that frequency, but our policy says we meet no less frequently than quarterly, because we don't want to, if we find that most of the quality committee is out on cruises somewhere, we don't want to.
Thanks, Tom.
we don't want to violate a Core 3A or Farm Core 3B standard.
So I just want to talk about the cap for a minute, whether or not to submit a cap. If you're missing 1 or 2 meetings because there's a change in staff, it's fine to have the corrective action plan, and it's only a couple of meetings. And if URAC happens to come upon those 2 meetings, you can give them the corrective action plan at that time. But what would you recommend, Sue, if it was a 2-year lapse because there was, as Tom said, and we've seen this, a change where a senior person taking over the department said, we're just going to meet twice a year? Would you submit the corrective action plan?
I would submit the corrective action plan because there's no way to hide it. There are so many quality standards that would be impacted, not just quality, but even other module standards that could be, like, think of pharma. I mean, if you didn't have a quality meeting for 2 years, my guess is you're not going to get accredited. So your only hope is a cap and be able to show a year of implementation. I've had that actual experience when I worked at URAC. That's the first thing that goes when budgets are tight, is the quality. Folks see it as not necessary. It's not doing the day-to-day work. And that organization was not accredited, even though they implemented it within 6 months of their reaccreditation. They were not accredited. So it is a big deal.
At the 2-year mark, I think we moved from simply needing a cap to needing cap and extensive prayer. So,
exactly.
Let's go on to this question. How often does the QMC have to report to the higher authority? And the higher authority is not the prayer I just mentioned. The higher authority, higher authority in this case, URAC has several words for that. It's not always consistent throughout all of the standards or even within a module as to how it refers to that. You might find it referring to a board of directors. That's very old language. That dates back to the 90s. In the next decade, URAC realized, well, it may not be the board of directors that we're talking about. It might be appropriate governing authority or governing body. And even that, with smaller organizations, I mean, very often it's the organization might be so small as the governing body is one person. But that's what, whatever it is first of all, let's talk about who it must be. What must be its characteristics? It must be, at least conceptually, one notch above the Quality Management Committee. Because one of the requirements is that it delegates authority, whoever this is, whether it's the CEO or the pharmacist in charge or the executive team or the board of directors, delegates authority to the Quality Management Committee to oversee the quality program. So that's the conceptual leap. It has to be one above the Quality Management Committee. And you see that also again in the requirement that the Quality Management Committee must periodically report to the appropriate governing body or a higher authority. So that's kind of conceptually who it is. It's whatever is right above the Quality Management Committee. Now, what if you have, let's say you're a pharmacy inside a large healthcare system, and your board of directors is on some other planet. It's so many levels higher than the pharmacy. You're not going to have that body of a large healthcare system approve the quality management program description for or delegate authority to the pharmacy quality management department. So that's why it might be a pharmacy level executive team, for perhaps the PIC and one or two other members of the executive team. And as for frequency of this reporting, the URAC standard is no less frequently than annually. It might be more frequent than that, but URAC requires it at least annually. Under the current standard, to remind you, URAC veterans, annually means 12 months to the month. So it's not once a year. It's not like, well, we did it in the spring of 2017 and then the fall of 2018. That's not annually. Now, it looks as though in at least the version of Core 4 that was that made it into the new case management standards and into the Certificate of Organizational Management program, it looks like that definition of annual is going away. But that's not true for any of you yet, unless you're a case management or COM applicant. It's still 12 months to the month that you need to do this and any other annual requirement.
Mm-hmm. And what is it that needs to be reported to this oversight authority?
Very often. Go ahead, Sue.
Typically, what I see organizations do is take the annual evaluation to the quality committee, and of course the review and approval of your quality program description. That's typically the two documents that are usually presented to the oversight authority, and that's the new buzzword, oversight authority. One of the things that we wanted to talk about today were the QIPs. And everybody was excited when Core 4 came, the version 4 of Core came out, because the QIPs basically went away, except for, I believe it was health plans. But now, because we're still under either Core 3 or 3.1, or when delegation comes out, 3.2, you still have to have QIPs. I think the only products that don't are IROs, credentialing. Do they have to have QIPs?
None for CVO.
None for CVO and none for IROs. They don't have to have them either. Everybody else has to have at least a minimum of 2 QIPs going at all times. Health plan need 3, and the 3 have to be all clinical. One of the QIPs, if you're interacting with consumers, has to be related to safety. So as Tom indicated early really well, he talked about having quantifiable measures. your baseline, your goal have to be in the same unit of measurement. It has to be, you have to have an opportunity for improvement. Recently, I had someone present a quip. Their baseline was 99.85 and their goal was 99.5. Well, that's not significant enough. URAC wouldn't see that as an opportunity for improvement. So you have to have how you're going to collect your data. You're going to have to identify your baseline, your goal. You have to have interventions identified. We talked a little bit earlier about system installments and those mechanisms to help get data. That can be an intervention. It cannot be the focus of the quip. And if you're not moving from your baseline to your goal, you have to look at what barriers are in place that are preventing that from happening. It's not when your quip is over and you don't meet it, then you do a barrier analysis. You need to think about that throughout the life of your quip if you're not moving in the right direction. If you're stalled and it's been 2 or 3 quarter or reporting periods, you should be looking at why can't we move the needle? What other interventions could we put in place? Lesley, you want to add something?
The life of the quip.
The organization gets to define it. I would not choose a quip that was going to be done in 3 months. I would try and pick a quip that's going to be at least in place for 6 months or a year. One of the things I would encourage you to put in your data collection area is that once you reach your goal, you will monitor it for 2 reporting periods in order to sustain that high level, to ensure that you're able to sustain that goal over that period. That gives you time to continue monitoring that quip because everybody knows that you're going to do that right from the get-go. And it allows you then to start thinking about a new quip because as the standard is very clear, the words are something I think almost verbatim. At any given time, you have to have 2 ongoing quips. So it's not okay to have a quip that you haven't met in 3 years and then you keep going. I'll tell you the one that got a lot of health call centers in trouble were access to service, abandonment rate, blockage rate. They develop a quip. They were never able to meet it because what they needed was employees. They couldn't get more staff, so they just continued monitoring that quip. Well, URAC considered that a safety issue, and they started denying accreditation to those folks. So you can't just continue monitoring something. You're not meeting it. You're not doing anything different about it. You need to be thinking about new interventions.
Well, actually, subject that actually, there's some feedback.
Can't hear you.
Changed the way in which they monitor those standards. So now in specialty pharmacy and MSP, you have to be able to meet your access standards in your call center 3 out of 4 quarters. So I guess the next question is, what happens if you aren't meeting your metric goals? Are you going to be in trouble with URAC, or how do you handle that? Sue, I'm going to pass that to you.
Yeah, no, you're not in trouble. If you can't meet your goal, but you have to, again, do that barrier analysis to see why. You may find that there's nothing that you can do to move that needle. Maybe you're relying on external sources. Maybe it's like if you're a health plan and you want all of your patients to have a hemoglobin A1C and you've done all the patient education, you've done the provider education, and it's just not moving. Well, and you've been doing this same quip for a long time. Well, then you have to look at why isn't it moving, bring it back to committee, discuss it, and then as a committee, you make a decision on whether there's something that you can impact. And if you can't, you may decide to close it as an unsuccessful quip.
Barrier analysis, think broadly in your barrier analysis. It might be that your interventions are terrible and need to be improved. And it might be that, that, as Sue said, it might be there's something outside that is outside of your control. And that's important to watch for. Or it might be that there's data leakage. So I seem to recall a few years ago, one of the quips of one of our health plan clients had to do with certain kinds of testing. This happens actually quite a bit in networks and plans. certain kinds of testing and procedures that some folks can get outside of like a hearing testing or eye test outside of the network. And so there's a whole lot of data leakage. Well, it may be that you need to completely redesign the QIP so that your interventions match what you're measuring, which is within your control. Very often over the years, we've seen the big barrier here is that what they're trying to measure is 3/4 of the variability in the metrics is outside of the organization's control.
Or the scope of the project is so wide that you can't manage it all. So like, for instance, if you want to do something with pain control and you've identified 50 ICD-9 codes that you're going to include in this pain control QIP, that might be too large. You may need to narrow the scope to get the QIP going and then expand it over time.
So it would be helpful if you could talk a bit about the scope of a QIP. I mean, let's say that an organization has is applying across a broad array, or let's say an organization has 5 lines of business, and they've got a QIP that only gets to 1 or 2 of those lines of business. So only a portion of their patient population is within the QIP. How does URAC look at that?
URAC looks at what they're seeking accreditation for. The scope of the QIP has to include the population that's included under the scope of the accreditation.
But
so
does it have to be the entire population? Let's say that I'm a health plan.
I've seen QIPs where it only limits it to like your Medicare book of business. Let's say you're Medicare, Medicaid, and you only want to do it for your Medicaid population. As long as the Medicaid population is within the scope of the accreditation, in my experience with URAC, that has been acceptable. It's when Medicaid's not included in the scope, or a good one for pharmacy. Specialty pharmacy wants to do a QIP on compounding. But compounding is only done for mail service scripts, not for specialty drugs. But you can't use it. That doesn't fall within the scope of the accreditation.
Let's see if we answered everybody's question. I notice we're coming up on the top of the hour.
We've very nearly answered them all. We have one here asking if we have to review all the performance metrics at every QMC meeting.
This is Sue, and I'll take that one. If you're a company that's doing meeting more frequently than quarterly, I would advise you to develop some type of a grid where things that need to be reported quarterly, you decide which month of the quarter. So you need to look at the metric to see how frequently either the regulatory body, the accreditation body requires you to review it. Like, for instance, in pharma, again, a lot of those are required to be reported quarterly. So yes, you have to report those quarterly. But if you're doing your meetings once a month, you can develop a little grid that says, okay, in January, I'm going to look at drum standards and drum metrics. In February, I'm going to look at distribution metrics. As long as it's covered at least once a month, you're okay.
Or once a quarter.
Once a quarter.
Right. I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, and I want to stress that. So in a sense, the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. Because even if you're meeting just quarterly, not all the reporting requirements are quarterly requirements. As Sue said, the pharmacy standards, particularly specialty and mail service, are heavy laden with quarterly reporting requirements. CSCD, PharmOp, patient management. It seems like almost every module has a quarterly requirement. That's actually not true about the other core standards. Like you don't have to report complaints as required by the core standard dealing with complaints more than annually. So as Sue said, go straight to the standard that is generating the requirement, and then make sure that that makes it into your dashboard and your standing agendas for your quality committee at the frequency dictated by the requiring standard.
Put it in your dashboard.
Yeah, put it in your dashboard. I think that's about it. I do want to make sure before we log off that we're going to do these. We're enjoying doing these so much, and we're getting such a nice response from you folks. We're going to do these each month. Next month, we're going to talk about pharmacy tours. The many little things that can go wrong on a pharmacy tour that can lead to bad problems. So particularly if you're in the world of pharmacy, join us. Click on it if you want to talk with any of us about what we've talked about today. There's a little button at the bottom of the screen. Schedule a free quality management consultation. We'll be glad to chat with you about any follow-up questions you might have. Write us emails with your questions. Let's stay engaged. We're having fun. Sana.
Yeah. You can also continue to post your questions on this page. There will be a replay available shortly after we finish, and we'll send out a link to the recording sometime tomorrow as well. So keep your eyes peeled.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Hope you all have an excellent evening.
Thank you.
Take care.